Did Christie tell you about the 2 kids murdered in 58? Huh? Boy drowning in 57? A bunch of fires? Nobody knows who did any of them. In 1962, they was going to open up. The water was bad. Christie will wind up just like these folks, crazy and broke. He's been up there a year fixing up that place. He must have dropped $25,000. And for what?
Okay, let's go. Let's go.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, aka TV's Travis. This is episode number 294, and our movie this week from 1980, Friday the 13th. And here to talk with me about it, he hadn't seen this or anything from the series, from Two Nerds, One Quest. It's Norm. How you doing?
What is going on, man? Thank you for having me back. This is I was very excited about this.
Absolutely. Okay, so you had not seen anything Friday the 13th at all.
No clips. The closest I've gotten to Friday the 13th is playing the video game that came out like 7 or 8 years ago. It was kind of like the Dead by Daylight, where you had 4 people and you had somebody playing Jason.
Yep.
So it had all that shit, all that that Crystal Lake stuff. And then I recently started listening to Ice Nine Kills, and they have a song called Thank God It's Friday. And that's about the extent of my knowledge for the most Friday the 13th.
All right. Was it just a thing that it wasn't interesting to you? Wasn't really up your alley?
I gravitated towards specific horror movies. I have a super active imagination, so I am very easy to this day even to freak out, especially in horror movies.
That's fair.
So I didn't really start watching horror movies until probably the 90s. Scream would be probably the biggest first one that I saw, other than I don't even know. I saw a couple here and there. I really enjoy the big ones though, like Halloween.
Yep.
The Exorcist, those style. And then Scream is probably my favorite franchise of all time. So
Sure. Which, Scream owes a lot to this franchise, but it owes a lot to a few different franchises. However, this one in particular, I've seen all of Friday the 13th movies at this point. I didn't watch them early on. I came to them a little bit later, but I did see Freddy versus Jason in theaters, and I can't remember. I think the rest of them, I did not see Jason X in the theater, but there were 10 mainline Friday the 13th movies from this on through to Jason X, which came out over the period of, I believe it was 18 years. I think Jason X was 97 or 98. But 8 of those movies came out in 10 years. So between 1980 and 1990, there were 8 Friday the 13th movies that came out, which is bonkers.
it's like our modern day Fast and the Furious. It feels like there should be 20 of them based on the fact that they just keep crapping them out. But
And what's funny is you mentioned Halloween. Halloween being the huge hit that it was in 1978 is the reason we have Friday the 13th in a lot of ways, because the director of this, Sean Cunningham, so he had started off on Broadway as like I can't remember what part of it he was in, but he got into filmmaking in the early 70s, knowing nothing about it whatsoever. And he actually became friends with Wes Craven and produced Wes's first film, The Last House on the Left. They had produced and made a couple of X-rated films before that, but the first feature film was Last House on the Left. And then he did these like Bad News Bears ripoffs in the mid 70s, and they didn't do anything. And Halloween comes out, is a huge hit. And he thought, why don't I make a horror movie? And he talked to the guy who wrote one of those Bad News Bears things, named Victor Miller, and basically told him, yeah, let's just do what Halloween did. Like the same thing. Let's just rip that off, basically. And that's not like speculation. He's gone on record saying, yeah, Halloween was a huge hit. We wanted to do the same thing. And this is the best part about kind of the making of this movie, and this cracks me up to no end. So he comes up with a title, Friday the 13th. And that's all he's got. And he takes out a full page ad in Variety magazine in 78, 79, something like that, touting it to be the scariest film ever made. He didn't have a script yet. He didn't even have a story yet. He just had a title. But he did this to drum up interest in investing in it. So it's like, this is balls the size of Gibraltar, right? Like,
Well, at that point, you're trying to come up against The Exorcist, which I think was also touted as like bonkers, scary, like
oh yeah,
cursed. I don't know how you attempt to make. I mean, it's publicity, sure, but I don't know how you attempt to make a claim like that without anything. It's
ballsy. But his
something.
thought was like, hey, what can it hurt? Like, the worst that'll happen is we don't make the movie. So, and he was young enough still in the film industry. He didn't know what he didn't know. And so it was just kind of like swing for the fences type of deal. So he puts that ad out. It draws some interest, and he gets money to make this. And there's a great, there's several documentaries on this. There's one, I think it's called Memories from Crystal Lake or something like that. And there's the Netflix series, The Movies That Made Us, did an entire episode on this movie.
Ooh, I'll have to
And
see
they
that.
have,
That's on my list.
yeah, they've got Sean Cunningham and Victor Miller and a bunch of the cast members and Tom Savini they interview and they talk about. And I mean, this was coming off the heels again of Halloween, made on a shoestring budget and they cast a bunch of young Broadway actors. They were stage actors at the time for this. They weren't film actors because, as Cunningham put it, he just wanted people that looked good and that could be believable reading the lines. That's all he cared about, really. So Janine Taylor, who plays Marcy, Robbie Morgan, who plays Annie, even Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon had his role in Animal House he had done, but that was it. He was back in New York, kind of. The story is he was back in New York kind of waiting tables and doing some work and just happened to luck into this one. So they get Kevin Bacon. But also, there's Kevin Bacon and Bill, the one guy, he was played by Harry Crosby, the son of Bing Crosby, which I thought was kind of cool.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And then Laurie Bartram and Mark Nelson and they round out the kids. Peter Brower played Steve Christie, the guy that's rebuilding the camp. And he was a little bit older than the rest of them. They were all supposed to be like 18, 19, 20-year-olds. And I think they were all kind of right around that age, early 20s. Peter Brower is a few years older, and he was actually dating Sean Cunningham's assistant at the time. And that's pretty much how he got the role, was he knew somebody and was involved and gets cast.
Sleeping your way into the show.
Hey, if it works, it works. And then they got Betsy Palmer to play Mrs. Voorhees. Famously did not want to do the movie. There's a great clip from a panel a few years ago where she says, the quote is, "I got the script, I read it, and I immediately said, 'What is this piece of shit?' and threw it across the room." And the best part about the clip for that is she's saying this on a panel, and sitting next to her is Vic Miller, the screenwriter. But then she said she took the role because she needed a car. Basically, her car broke down. She needed to buy a new car. She needed money for that. So she took this role figuring it's a low budget movie. Nobody's ever going to see it. Which, if you watch The Movies That Make Us, that gets repeated a lot by her, by Janine Taylor, who played Marcy, who was a little bit worried about doing the movie because some of them, once they, so it goes, once they figured out what type of movie it was, a few of the actors were like, I don't know, maybe not, because they were like, stage actors, theater actors, and they're doing this low budget schlock horror movie. But all their thoughts were like, yeah, but nobody's going to see it. right? So we can do that. Like nobody's going to care.
It's not going to hurt us.
Um,
It's not going to help us. It's just something for cash and time.
yeah, yep. Get some money and learn a few things. Tom Savini, who did the makeup effects, he was brought in because of his work on George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, and so they brought him on to do that. But then they, cast a few other people. It's a very small movie if you think about like the cast. It's not a lot of people.
What
And
else to the makeup effects, by the way?
yeah, oh, we're gonna talk about those because boy, Tom Savini and his assistant Tasso, I want to say his name is. I had it, and anyway, they were amazing. But so having never seen any of these movies before, what type of expectations did you kind of have going into watching this? What were you expecting to see?
I expected all of the tropes that you would expect in an 80s, 70s, 80s horror style movie. I actually expected to see more nudity. I expected more, not necessarily racist, but overtly like what was okay then, inappropriate racial stereotypes. And boy, did we get that in one scene. But um, for the most part, it wasn't, it was surprising that it wasn't more visually naked and inappropriate. I
Mhm.
expected the everybody has sex and then dies kind of tropes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that sort of became a thing later on with the movies. But it was the type of thing where they weren't really thinking about that at the time. They were just going to make a movie, and um, it wasn't like they just wanted young kids doing young kid stuff. So they were going to be, playing strip monopoly and messing, horsing around and all that kind of. But you're right; it doesn't have quite the nakedness that you would come to expect from sort of the '80s slasher.
This was better than I thought it had any right to be.
So that is the thing, right? If you think about this movie, it's a really good kind of mystery slasher. It's very much if you took sort of an Agatha Christie novel and stripped away a lot of the extra bits and just said, all right, what is the very basis of this, and let's make it super violent.
It's almost like an older Stephen King, Dean Koontz style book put to movie, in the fact that it's not overt. It's kind of a slow burn to start,
Mm-hmm.
but boy, does it ramp up at parts.
Yeah, yeah. When it gets going, it gets going. And I think the pacing of the kills is important in this because it is. It's funny when you learn that like they didn't have a script to start and they were just sort of going off of, okay, we've got a title, and then they kind of built it around the kills and saying like, well, we got to have these people, these different characters dying off, and they sort of built the story around that, and you kind of can see that. If you watch it again, you'll sort of notice like there's a lot of these lulls and these very long, slow moving parts. Some of that, I think, makes it to be boring for some people, but for me, I think the pacing in this is actually quite good.
I would agree. And to be honest, I actually thought we would see more kills. Like half the kills are off screen.
Right. And what's funny is this movie had to be cut down to get an R rating. It was going to be rated X for violence, and they had to cut down a bunch of stuff and trim a lot away, including the version I watched had even a little bit. I watched this on Paramount Plus this time, and there's one kill in particular where they cut just a couple of seconds from it, from the version that I've normally watched, and it's dumb that they did that, and I don't know why.
That's the version I watched. What did I miss?
You basically, so all right, so to break down the movie, or the start of it anyway, we get a cold open, which is this is the one time I think for a few of the movies anyway that the cold open isn't recapping what happened. That was one of the things that the Friday the 13th movies did, was they would always recap And this one, obviously being the first, doesn't have that. But we get that cold open of like the kids, the counselors sitting around the fireplace in 1958, singing pseudo hymns before a couple of them decide to wander off and do a little barnyard canoodling.
So obvious
And
too. The way he looks at her in the middle of the
yeah.
group, he's like, "Hey, what you up
I think
to?" Yeah.
my note was like, first of all, 1958 was 64 years ago. So you got to think about that for a second. Like, it's kind of crazy, but they're already doing the POV stuff early on in the movie, which I dug kind of all the way throughout. You get a lot of that first person POV perspective of the killer. And then
Which I love, by the way.
yeah. And my one note was like, wow, those two are just undressing each other with their eyes, like blatantly. Like they aren't hiding it at all. And no one cares. And they just wander off to do their thing. And we get the POV shots. And then they're their first two kills. But the next kill is Annie.
Mhm.
So after we meet her, she comes into the town, the little town, meets the pup, which was great. I love seeing the dog there. Goes into the diner. We get that kind of tropey thing of like asking about the place that everybody's afraid of nearby. And so everybody gets quiet, and does the whole like, I was half expecting to hear the little of a chair like sliding.
Kind of like a record scratch.
Yeah, exactly. We do get the radio turning down, which was
True.
fun.
Yeah.
But Annie, when she gets in the truck, and I love because we got to get some backstory, right? So what better way to do that than a nice exposition dump from a random dude driving a truck? Which
side note, I have a note that, boy, another thing that is a thing of its time that nobody blinks twice about is him helping her into the truck is full on, both hands right on the ass cheeks and shoving right up. It's like,
yep.
boy, oh boy.
Yeah. I actually had a note of, hey, watch those hands, bud. Like,
yeah.
Jeez. So funny thing, when they shot all the stuff inside the truck of him giving the exposition and her reacting to it, they weren't in the truck together. So she's reacting to somebody else, which that's common in movies. However, I'm pretty certain they were actually driving a truck, and it wasn't like a pulled behind on a trailer type situation, which I like, because a lot of times driving scenes in movies, especially if they're pulled in a trailer, it's straight on. This is from the side, but you can tell he's really driving because he's paying a lot of attention to her, but he's also paying attention to the road. I just like that feel in the scene. But he drops a whole lot of backstory on her about camp, because before they left, we did meet Crazy Ralph, right? The crazy old guy that tells her, she's heading to Camp Blood, and the place is cursed. We're going to talk about Crazy Ralph in a little bit.
I love that guy.
He is easily in my top 2 favorite characters in this movie is Crazy Ralph. So they drop all the, some kid drowned up there, and these counselors were killed, and bad water and all that. And I love the line of he's dropped $25,000 in the last year fixing that place up, because I went and did the math. It seems like you might have as well, but I checked the inflation alone. $25,000 at the time this was being made to now means that Steve Christie was pouring in somewhere in the neighborhood of $115,000 into that, not counting any other changes, just by inflation, which is a lot. That is a lot of money.
And to fix up a camp that's been defunct for 20 years is like cheap. Like nowadays, if you go and you try to fix something like that up, you're spending an easy, I don't know, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000.
Probably. I mean, it would all depend on kind of the size of the camp and what needs to be done to it. But yeah. So when Annie gets dropped off, and then she goes walking along, and now we get to meet the rest of the kids. As they drive up, they meet Steve. He's doing work around the place, and then he takes off. And what I liked was, this movie is a slasher, but it's a slasher that's also a whodunit, and they're trying to keep you on your toes as to who's who and who's kind of coming from where. So Steve is a weird guy. Like, he just feels very odd to me. And there's something going on. He is awkward. And there's some kind of a history with him and Angie or Alice.
Alice, yeah.
That we don't really get into, but there was something weird there. And then he's like, all right, well, I've got to leave for a while and go do things. So I'll be back. You guys work on whatever. And he takes off in his Jeep. And it's very important that he's driving a blue Jeep when he leaves.
Mhm.
Because when we cut back to Annie walking along the side of the road, a blue Jeep drives by
Mm-hmm.
and picks her up.
Mhm.
And we get yet another scene of her in a car. Most of her screen time was sitting in the passenger seat of a vehicle.
Yeah,
At this point,
I have notes about hitchhiking. Like,
it was a different time.
that is literally my note. If you could see my notes right now, I have it's a different time. Like, the first time she gets, she hitchhikes, I'm like, okay, that happens. The second time she's on a deserted road, I'm like, no good is going to come of this. Like, this is like, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Never mind the fact that she had probably already been walking like 60 or 70 miles at this point. She's like, oh, I can walk another 20.
When you gotta hoof it, you gotta hoof it. So she gets picked up by the other Jeep. And at this point, did you make the connection that it was the same vehicle or a similar vehicle? Or
No, I recognized it. There was a lot. I recognized there was a lot of Jeeps in this, which led me to believe that they got a deal from the Jeep dealer, or they just found a bunch in a in a shop. But no, I actually did not recognize the color.
Okay. So Annie, is driving along and talking about, oh, I'm going to be at the camp and all that. And then they drive right past the turnoff for the camp. And now she gets scared. And the whole time we don't see who the driver is. They never show us the driver. And so Annie just decides, well, screw this, and jumps out of the moving Jeep to get away because she's now freaked out. That was actually Robbie Morgan, the actor playing Annie, did that. She that was part of what helped her get the role. Was she had a gymnastics background and was like, you need me to jump out of a car? I can jump out of a car. That's fine. So
based on the way she landed, I was like, oh, if that person doesn't know what they're doing, it looked like they were going to snap their neck with the way they went head first. And you could see the tuck and roll.
Yeah.
But it was like, oh, you landed on your neck, buddy.
So Annie gets out and starts running through the woods and is being chased by the driver who, stops the Jeep, goes chasing. And this is where the edit happened in Paramount Plus. When Annie gets finally caught by the killer and her throat cut, in the version that I've seen the most, it's just longer. Like you see the blood kind of coming down from the appliance and she sort of slides down a little bit and then it fades to white. And this just went did the fade to white too quickly and it looked off. And I'd been watching it. And I'm like, hold on. And I went and I found my other copy that I normally watch. And I went to that moment and I'm like, yeah, okay. So they just kind of cut it. I don't know. It's a dumb edit because they don't do it to any other kills that I could find throughout the rest of the movie. It's just that one.
That's weird.
For some reason. There might have been a cut in the Kevin Bacon death scene, but we'll talk about that. But this is our first kind of look at some of Tom Savini's amazing makeup work.
That was great. That was,
it was Tom Savini. Yeah. And then his assistant and friend was Tasso Stavrakis. And they did all the makeup effects for this. And that thing was great. Like it was this really good, foam rubber appliance that they put on her neck. And he said they just ran like copper tubing up for the blood. And they had it set. And it's a brilliant cut too, because the way the slash happens, the killer walks in front of the camera. So you can use that as a cut point because there was already going to be a slit in the appliance that she's wearing. So it's a great way to get around that limitation. And then the fact that it's, glued onto her neck means when she kind of opens, moves her head up a little bit, it opens up the wound and then the blood can flow out. It looked really good.
It didn't look heavy at all.
No, not at all. There's a slight, and the high definition transfers that we get to see now, there's a slight discoloration that you wouldn't have noticed back then because just fidelity. But it's,
Mhm.
I mean, we're talking about a movie that is 44 years old now, and it still looks great. So that was the one that I noticed on the Paramount Plus version was slightly altered, and it annoyed me. But outside of that, everything else seemed to be pretty normal. But that also comes at about 20 minutes in. And there again is that pacing I was talking about, where it's like we had some time, we got to know her a little bit, we got to know some of the kids a little bit, and then we get a kill. And we're sort of not sure who the killer is. And they want you to think, could it be Steve? Maybe, but we didn't show him. But he was driving a Jeep and he left. So you got that kind of whole thing going on. And then the movie kind of goes into the, all right, here's the kids just messing around, playing in the water, and we get to meet the rest of them. And one of the things I like about this is these kids, for the most part, likable. They're not like horrendously awful. Ned is the one that you're just like, all right, he's got to go. We got to get rid of Ned because he's the Joker, right? He's the practical Joker, and he's the annoying one. He's meant to be. So there's that.
Clearly has a crush on what's her face? Not Brenda. Kevin Bacon's girlfriend.
Yes, Marcy. Yeah, he's got a crush on Marcy. But he's also hitting on Brenda. Terrible practical joke though when she sets up that archery target and then he fires an arrow at it. Like, whoa.
Right.
Which apparently it was actually done by Tom Savini. He's the one that fired the arrow for the shot. But I was like, come on, man, that's not funny. Like, I think my note was like, this is him, quote, flirting. And as I'm writing that and I'm remembering the scene, I'm like, and yet it works because she's all cutesy with him after that, which was funny.
Well, it's hard not to be, it's hard not to be charmed when he has such a great impersonation of whoever the hell he was trying to impersonate.
I'm not sure.
The voices he was going for, I was like, well, I couldn't quite pick out one particular voice. It was almost like he had, I suppose in the 80s, it could have been some obscure person from like the 60s or 50s from film, but it was just you would think it would be somebody popular, but
yeah,
it was terrible.
It was like, it was almost like he had a voice changer that was set on demo mode, and it just kept rifling through different voices. It was weird.
It was kind of like the comic. Who was the one with the big cigar?
Like Milton Berle?
Yeah, kind of like
Yeah. Are you thinking of Groucho Marx?
Kind of had like a Marx.
Okay, there's a little bit of that, yeah. But I mean, outside of Ned, like Ned's annoying, but he's annoying and he takes his pranks a little too far because then later on when they're playing around in the lake, he fakes drowning.
That's shitty.
To get the mouth to mouth and go in for a kiss. I'm like, just not cool, man. But like Annie, Alice, Marcy, Jack, Bill, they're all fine. There's nothing wrong with them. Like they're just kids.
Annie was way too happy. She was
very excited. But through her dialogue, like this was the thing she wanted to do was help kids. Right. And so, yeah, she was super, super stoked to be doing whatever cooking. She was going to be running the kitchen. So with Steve gone and them just kind of all hanging out and I guess done doing any of the painting or anything. I don't know. We never see them really do a whole lot of work. They put the dock in. That's about it.
Speedo alert.
Oh yeah.
One of my notes is Kevin's bacon. There's there is a gratuitous crotch. I don't know if it's supposed to be there because it was a close up on whatever girl's face, and there is 6 inches from the back of her head, Kevin Bacon Speedo crotch shot, which did not hide anything.
No, there was nothing left to the imagination there whatsoever. But hey, good on him, I guess. but yeah, we get basically the kids kind of just hanging out, doing their thing, and then eventually, one of the things I like too is as they start getting picked off one by one, which is, that's the thing you do in a slasher movie, right? You take them out
Mhm.
one by one, thin the cast. Is usually in your slashers, people start doing really dumb things, and they start making really poor decisions, and that doesn't necessarily happen here because they don't know about anybody getting killed,
Mhm.
which I think is pretty clever, right? Like, um, so Annie gets killed in the forest. Nobody finds her. She never even met any of them. She never got to the camp. The next one to go is Ned, right? I think Ned is the next one.
Mhm.
He's
Yeah,
off
he gets
moping.
picked off in the cabin.
Yeah, yeah. He gets the off-screen death, right? Because he's like moping, and then he sees somebody, and he goes over and dies inside the cabin. And then we get a little moment with Jack and Marcy, and she tells the story of like her dream of a storm, and there's a storm moving in, and how she's scared of storms because of dreams she used to have, and all that. And then they decide, well, all right, storm's coming. Guess it's time to go have sex because that's what we do.
Giant flash of lightning like that. Yep, that's my cue.
Yep, exactly. That's what does it. So they head to the cabin to get it on, and they do their thing. And afterwards, Marcy's like, "Well, I got to go pee," so she gets up to leave. This was one of the few movies that Janine Taylor actually did. She didn't do a lot of acting after this. She got into business. She just decided she didn't want to be an actor. Um, But she gets up to leave, and Jack sparks up with Jay. He's hanging out, puts his tank top back on, and then we get one of the most iconic kills in 80s horror, but certainly in this movie, which is the arrow through the throat. That was a good one. That again, really good foam rubber torso, and just the logistics of doing that, where they got like the bed and it's cut out so Kevin Bacon's head can stick out from the top, and then they've got from the neck down is all fake. And I love the story of how this scene went behind the scenes, because you've got Kevin Bacon crouched down in there. You got Tom Savini's underneath the bed with the arrow getting ready to push it through. And one of the neat things about that was his idea for this was like, we've seen in movies prior to this, you've seen like somebody getting a stake into their heart, or being stabbed by things, but you don't ever get to see like the reverse of that. And so he wanted to do something different, and he came up with this idea. So he's down there ready to do that. His Tasso is, they had a big like copper fire extinguisher, like a big old school pump fire extinguisher.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
had their fake blood in that, and they had the hose running up, so he could pump the fire extinguisher to pump the blood out the wound. So after the stab would happen, they had the hose running in there, and so they're all set. But they know they've only got one shot at it, right? Because once you poke the arrow through, your foam is ruined, and you'd have to make a new one. So, oh, and they had a third person that stood in for Betsy Palmer's character, grabbing Kevin Bacon by the head to hold him in place. So you had all these people like crouched under this bed, and they go for it. They push the arrow through, and Tasso's like, "I'm over here." And I start pumping furiously to get the blood flowing, and the hose came undone from the fire extinguisher. And so no blood's coming out. So he has to grab the hose and just start blowing on it to push the blood through that's in the hose. So two things about that. Number one, visually, it made it look so much more gruesome, because instead of just the blood flowing out like it did for Annie's neck wound, you get actual spray, like it would be arterial spray, and you get
Yeah, kind of
that
it's
action going on.
splattery.
Mm-hmm. Which just looks gruesome. Like it's just, and the fact that because they did it in the way that they did, Kevin Bacon's face is there the whole time, and he's reacting to it, which just looks so good. But the other part of it is the fake blood was made out of Caro syrup, food coloring, and Kodak photo flow developer chemical
Ooh.
because they needed that in order to get the right consistency. That's what they used. So Tasso was like, "Yep, we got done with that," and I immediately ran down to the lake and washed my mouth out repeatedly because I had a mouthful of just
Mouthful of cancer.
film developing. Well, and yeah, so but a happy accident because I think had it would have still been an iconic kill and really good special effect makeup, but I think having those spurts of blood just made it took it to a next level and made it
Yeah.
look so much better.
I would absolutely
So-
agree. That was actually one of my between that and the one you're probably going to talk about next. Those two, I think, were my favorite deaths in this.
So let's see. After this, we get Brenda dies off screen during the rainstorm because they decide her. So Brenda, Alice, and Bill decide to play strip Monopoly because they're bored. So you do that.
Was that before Marcy's?
It's during Marcy's.
Okay.
So they start playing the strip Monopoly. They're doing their thing. And after Jack dies, then we get Marcy in the bathroom.
Yeah.
And so one of the cool things, this camp that they were at actually exists. It was a Boy Scout camp that they used. And so a lot of the cabins were real, except for the bathroom one. That one they built. And the funny thing was the set decorator and set designer said that they built it and it had like the row of toilets and then the showers. And only one of the toilets actually functioned. But at one point they had run out of money and they left and they came back like 2 weeks later, but somebody had been there and used a bunch of the toilets. So they had to clean them all out.
Oh no.
And I loved her line because she's like, that's when it's good to have assistants. So while the strip Monopoly is going on, this is Marcy's. And this was a case where the scene, again, didn't play out exactly the way they had originally planned it, but I think it works better. So they actually had, so Marcy's in the bathroom, and this is your 80s gratuitous, like she's just in her underwear. And she's hearing things. I absolutely love the shot. No, it's Brenda later. Take that back. So Marcy hears something, goes over to the showers, kind of does the, hey, and nobody's there. And then she goes, oh, it must have been my imagination. And in the background, you just see the shadow of the axe on the wall.
I love those effects. The not so overt, the hint of what's going to come, I think to me is more scary than seeing somebody like walking down the hallway or creeping up behind somebody or hiding in a closet. It's that almost that Hitchcock shower stab that's like, ooh, we still don't know who this person is. It's very mysterious.
Yeah. Halloween had a couple of great ones, even though it's Michael Myers the whole time and it's The Shape. There's some great shots of like him in a shadow or a shadow and then the face slowly materializes, like the light just hits him, like that kind of stuff. So I love that. But one of the things Tom Savini liked to do is, and this makes perfect sense, is so they had the gag and they actually had a fake head for Janine Taylor. And something happened with it, and so they couldn't use it. So what they ended up doing was gluing that rubber axe appliance right to her face.
I'm sure that was comfortable to take off.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, because I think the way she says it is they just hot glued it right onto her face. Now who knows if that's exactly what they did or not? But this was a tiny little thing, a tiny little production, so it's not like they had a lot. But they basically glued that axe. However, to get around the fact that it's very much a rubber axe that's glued onto her face, but the way they shoot it, so you see a real axe and you see the swing of the axe and you see it hit something else because that light gets shake, and moves around. And then you cut to her reacting and the axe is already embedded. and it gives you the feeling as a viewer of the impact of her getting that axe buried into her head. And it works
It looked
really,
good.
really well.
It looked great. That was it was not gratuitous, kind of like the Kevin Bacon
Mhm.
death. It was more of a, like, you actually saw, it almost looked like it was in her face without, without shit spurting out of it. It was just, it
Yeah.
was there. Like, oh, holy crap, you have an axe in your face. Now what?
Right. Yeah, it was really, really well done. And that's one of the things this movie did was it varied the kills. So they weren't all the same, and they weren't all even the same level. They were memorable in different ways. And so after Marcy's taken out, let's see, Brenda dies off screen because she, in the middle of their, I like how they're playing strip Monopoly, the three of them, and then the door gets blown open by the storm, and
Uh-huh.
Brenda's like, "Well, that's it, I'm done.
Yep.
Like, no more strip
Doesn't even
Monopoly."
collect her clothes. Yep.
Nope.
Leaves her
Just
clothes. Yep. I'm out.
puts on a rain jacket and leaves, and just goes back to her cabin because she left the windows open, I guess, and changes into a nightgown. Now, when she goes to the bathhouse, the bath cabin, I loved that scene because we've already seen Marcy get killed in there. And so this whole time you're just waiting for it to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you're waiting for it. And we even get like the shot where you see the hand on the shower curtain. And then it goes away. And it's like, you just wait. You spend that whole scene waiting for her to get killed. And then it doesn't happen.
I thought that was going to be the point to where they realized they were getting killed. I thought she was going to find her body, or at least like blood or something.
Yeah. And she still doesn't, and ends up leaving there. And then we hear the weird, the little kid's voice, and she goes out. I love that she put the rain jacket on to go back to her cabin, but when she hears a voice, she just grabs the flashlight and runs out in her nightgown.
Yep. I have that note. Yep. White nightgown. Sure. Why not?
Yeah, sure. So she goes out there, and then we just hear her. We see all the lights come on in the archery range, and then we hear her scream off camera.
One of the things that I loved about this, her going to that archery range, is the fact that it is 100% black. You don't see trees. You don't see anything. You get nothing. It is her with a light, and she is in, you can hear the rain and stuff, but it is very claustrophobic. It is very, the feeling that you get. And if anybody's ever run through the dark, like not necessarily knowing where they're going, you get this feeling of, oh shit, I don't know what's going to happen. This is not cool. And then you follow that up with, she gets to the archery range, and then suddenly it is, 2,000 halogen watt lights pointing in her direction, and she is instantly blinded.
Yeah. So I am on a podcast called Gore, where we talk all about horror movies. And if you've listened to this show, because we do all of October, I bring the host of that on. But Monica from Gore has a thing she loves in horror movies. She likes to call her solitude moments, or her solitude shots. And they're these moments in horror films that make you feel isolated and alone. And this movie does a good amount of some of those. Some of them can be quiet moments, and some of them can be not so quiet moments. And that whole idea of the dark and running in the dark and not knowing where anything is kind of one of those. So yeah, she dies off screen, and then you got Alice and Bill are left. And again, at this point, they don't know anyone else is actually dead. Nobody does. Like they haven't found anything like this. So the lights go out. Bill goes to check the generator, leaves Alice, get some sleep or whatever. So he goes to check the generator. There's gas in it. He can't seem to find anything wrong with it. And then he gets attacked, I think, in the generator room.
We just don't actually see it. Yeah, we cut away from it.
And then Alice wakes up. Meanwhile, while this is all going on, we do cut to Steve in town at the diner.
Yeah.
So this whole time, if you're watching this for the first time, were you contemplating maybe the killer is Steve, or were you not? Did you never really tag him as that? And you were just like, he's just gone.
The thought crossed my mind. I was not convinced. Spoiler alert, I know who the killer is.
Okay.
Like, so when I'm watching this, it's hard to, after 40 years, not know that Mama Voorhees is the killer in the first one.
Well, especially if you're a
What-
Scream fan and you've seen
Yeah.
Scream more than once.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they even say it right in Scream,
Yeah.
he's not even in the first one. But the idea is always there that he has come back, with the way that he's odd with the Jeep and all that fun stuff. But I don't think they did a good enough job convincing that he was A, dangerous enough, and B, involved in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, there's just not enough time with him early on.
Mhm.
But I think it's because they didn't really have a plan for that. I don't think they had much of a plan, because I know one of the trivia bits I saw was Betsy Palmer trying to convince them, like, hey, maybe we should have, like, Mrs. Voorhees like wave to Annie as she's walking through town or something like that, and like, because we never see her, and then she just shows up at the end of the movie. Like, on paper, that should not work, right? The way this movie reveals its killer shouldn't work, but it does.
I mean, my assumption is that, when you see her, spoiler alert, she starts talking to herself as Jason. My assumption is that she just lives alone and she's just a whacked out, who knows how she gets her groceries. She just doesn't go to town. She's just secluded.
Yeah. So Bill gets killed off screen. When Alice finds him, that's another real good reveal. And that was a legit scream, because apparently they said that they tried to keep Adrienne King off the set for most of that day, and then kind of just sprung that on her. That was, though, we talk about Tasso and the blood in his mouth, right, with the photo flow in it. So that appliance that was on Harry Crosby, again, Tom Savini, designed that, built it. It fit over his head to have the arrow coming out of his eye. But there was blood flow to that, and it flowed into his eye. And he was nearly blinded. In fact, he was blinded for a little while. He said in an interview, like, they took that thing off and his eye just started melting. And he was frightened, and they rushed him to a hospital. And he said, Harry Crosby said, they did the whole flashlight to see if my pupil would react, and he didn't see the light. And it was one of those where Tom Savini was like, yeah, I mean, you buy stage blood, especially for eyes nowadays, it's all safe. We didn't know any of that back then. Like, we weren't trying to cause a problem. We just didn't know any better. So it got a little scary there. But he was fine. And he came, the fact that he was in interviews about this movie tells me that he doesn't hold any ill will.
No,
I would hope. But
you would assume that. You would assume that he would stay as far away from that as humanly possible.
Yeah. But that's a good, like, it's a bummer that, from a horror film fan perspective, it's a bummer that death was off screen, but boy, did it look good when they reveal him. And it's a great reveal. Him hanging on the wall or hanging on the door. He's got like 3 arrows sticking out of him.
Well, that's just interesting, that knowing who the actual killer is how the hell did he get up there?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. She's strong. She's a strong old lady. Tell you what.
Apparently.
And as Steve is making his way back to the camp, his Jeep gets stuck or won't start. So he gets a ride with a cop. And I think they only put that scene in so that they could work in the line of, oh man, it's Friday the 13th and there's a full moon. Because before that, there really hadn't been a mention of the date. And if you think about it, other than the title screen or like, words on the screen, but none of the characters said it. So I think that's the only reason that scene is in the movie, of him riding with the other police officer, who then takes him part way and then gets a call and it's like, well, I got to let you out here, and turn around to drive the other direction. So, but Steve ends up on foot, and then he gets stabbed at the sign, which I love the sign. I absolutely love the sign of welcome to Camp Crystal Lake.
Well, and you also get that same black, secluded.
Yep.
It's that callback to what happens to
Mhm.
Brenda. Is it's completely pitch black, and he's kind of walking. It feels like in the middle of nowhere, and he comes up to that sign, and then he also gets, flashed in the eyes again.
Yep.
It's
He
very
gets blinded
effective.
by it. It is, and then there's that moment of recognition from him too. So now we still haven't had the reveal of who the killer is, but Steve knows who it is because he recognizes them and says, "What are you doing out in this mess?" Which thankfully it had stopped raining by then. Then he gets stabbed. So then we get kind of our final act, which is Alice, who still doesn't know anyone's dead, and she's making herself a cup of coffee, making 2 cups of coffee because she thinks Bill's coming back. And then sees the headlights, goes out to meet Mrs. Voorhees. And this is our reveal. It's like an hour and 10 minutes into an hour and a half long movie. And we finally meet Mrs.
Damn near
Voorhees.
the end of the movie.
And Betsy Palmer, I'm telling you, she may not have wanted to do the movie and may have only done it for money, but she did not go. She brought it for this performance. And they did put her in a bunch of layers, like the sweater and then like layers underneath that just to make her look a little bit bigger. So we get the final showdown. So she's all, oh, don't worry about it. Everything's going to be okay. I'm a friend, blah, blah, blah. And then when she goes inside and she starts cracking and tells the story of her son and all of this. And I love Alice slowly figuring out, like, this lady's crazy. And so there's a couple of fight sequences between them in the house and then outside. By the way, one of those moments where Mrs. Voorhees slaps Alice, that was a full-on slap because Betsy Palmer, stage actor, so she was used to stage slapping people, right? Like really slapping them, but not hard, but making contact. And so she did actually slap Adrienne King and Sean Cunningham and to be like, you don't have to. We can cheat that with like camera angles. So, but
it was effective. It was loud. It was like oh
yeah,
I'm sure that must have felt fantastic.
You know it. They get their tussle, and Alice holds her own. Like she fights her off twice, including hitting her the second time with a cast iron frying pan. Effective weapon.
Also, never not funny. I will laugh every time somebody gets hit with a frying pan. I don't care what it is. It will make me laugh every time.
100% agree. Love it though. Love it as a weapon. And then she leaves and she goes and sits by the water now because she figures it's all done, right? Because there was blood coming from the wound when she hit her the second time. But no, Mrs. Voorhees ain't stopping. And goes after her a last time and they have their fight. And this last fight sequence, I love this between Alice and Mrs. Voorhees because it is equal parts well choreographed and janky, which is exactly how it should look. Because these are not skilled fighters, both character and actual people. And so I did like the story though that Tom Savini and Tasso Stavrakis had they'd finished, they'd wrapped and they were leaving. And as they were leaving, they saw that they were filming that fight and stopped to watch, and it was terrible. And so they ended up helping choreograph that final fight because they were, they had like a fencing background and fight choreography background as well. So they helped to choreograph that last fight in it. I would love to see what it was like before that.
It was probably just arms and legs flying everywhere.
Probably. And then we get, it's so funny the way that Mrs. Voorhees gets taken out because it's the machete and it's slow-mo and it's decapitation. But again, the effects makeup is so good. They made a fake head of her, and Tasso had it pinned on his shoulders. And so he had the fake head, and it was like stuck in there with toothpicks. So it was just barely on there. And he's kind of hunched forward, and he's wearing the sweater. And Tom Savini cut at it with the machete because he knew exactly where to hit it to make the head just come right off. And then we get that awesome shot of like the headless shoulders and the hands kind of gripping like that. And if you pay attention, you can see it's a man's hands because they're all hairy knuckles, which cracks me up. But yeah, that was the assistant special effects guy Tasso just doing that, and that's what ends it. So that was originally how things were going to end, was just there, basically. Kind of wrap it up from there. But we do get another fairly iconic moment, which is the moment on the lake. What did you think of that? Where Alice is in the boat the next morning.
So, two things. First of all, am I the only one when the head popped off and she swung that machete, literally said there can be only one?
No, you're not, but it's me. So of course I said that.
That is the first thing I thought of is, I'm waiting for like the electricity and the sparks and, the body to float up in the air. And then before that, when they're fighting in the barn, the other part of this movie that made me really laugh was when she had the empty shotgun. She hit Mama Voorhees in the lady crotch so hard, and then ran away. That made me laugh as well because it was the typical hit in the crotch, eyes open up and you fall over. Like it wasn't. Yep. It was literally comic relief in the middle of this like creepy fight. She's sitting there with a shotgun and she's aiming and she can't shoot her. And so you're like, oh shit, this is it. And she's coming and she has, the knife and the machete and all this other stuff. And the last thing I expected was a gun butt to the crotch.
Yeah. It does kind of come out of nowhere. It's pretty spectacular.
I'm sorry, to get back to your original question. I did not know about that.
Okay.
That made me jump.
Because you're not prepared for it. And, I've seen it enough times now that I know it's coming. And the story behind it is that they had wrapped up shooting. Basically, they were pretty well done, or they were close to done. And one of the producers, who was a guy that was described as, he's one of those guys that has big stacks of cash and just likes to peel it off and give to people, from Boston. And the story is that he wanted an ending, a jump scare like they had in Carrie, which the end of Carrie has a jump scare of the hand coming out of the grave. And that's the story. Whether that was the thing or not, who knows? Because they obviously had to do like more makeup work, and Tom Savini designed that makeup. So if they did it after the fact, did they call him back? I don't really know, but it is an interesting dream sequence that became more than a dream sequence.
Yeah, because that was very interesting to me. The dream caught me. I wasn't sure where it was going to go. Like, she's caught in the boat, the cops get her, and then suddenly it's just this music and this weird ass half rotted kid leaps out of the water.
Yeah. And then she wakes up in the hospital and the one cop is there and she's like, they're all dead. And yeah, everybody died. You're the only one that survived. And then she asks, what about the boy in the lake? And they're like, what boy? We didn't find any boy. And I love then he's still out there. And then just the long look. And then we get that shot of the lake in just a couple of bubbles. And that's how the movie ends. And it was this sort of idea of like kind of sequel baiting, but also mystery. Did she really see that? Was there really something there? Like that kind of thing. I think it works. I think the whole ending of the movie works personally.
Yeah, I liked it. Because to me, it leaves it open. Like, what is the thought process of this woman that is the lone survivor at a camp, to where, like, does she then become the next killer? Like, does she just lose her mind and end up in a, an insane asylum? Does she, what
Yeah.
happens? It leaves
There's
it
a lot of
wide
ways you
open.
could go.
I liked it. I liked it a lot. It was good.
Yeah, well, you liked it a lot more than critics did at the time because critics hated this. This was.
I'm gonna lie. I like a lot of things that critics don't like.
Yeah, but there's not liking something, and then there's Gene Siskel giving away the twist of the movie in his review in hopes that it would stop people from going to see it.
What a
And
dick.
also giving out Betsy Palmer's address so that people could send her letters of protest in his review of the movie. That's
I guess they didn't have doxing back in the day, huh?
Apparently not. That's a little rough. And I mean, look, even though like it is rough, it's not rough by today's standards, and I get that it's a lot more difficult to watch something like this back then, but that's a little too far. Like people calling it, I think it was Siskel and Ebert both said like they hated it. It was, and they thought it was misogynistic, which I didn't quite get because as far as the deaths go, it's straight down the middle. There's 10 deaths in the movie. It's 5 guys, 5 women.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any particular side got worse than the other. I think all of the kills were fairly even in terms of like, because again, as I mentioned, these characters, there was this thing to tie in morality to these horror movies of, oh, if you have sex and if you do drugs and if you drink, then you're bad and then you die. But you can tell that in this movie and in Halloween, they weren't thinking about that when they were making it, because none of these kids are like terrible. That would become a thing, I think, as the genre continued on.
And it made sense in this because Mama Voorhees, when she's talking about, when she finally gets there and is talking to Brenda in the cabin, she says they ignored him. He was in the water and
Yep.
they just ignored him. So to her, it doesn't matter what these people are doing. If they're not paying attention to the water, they're screwed. They're done. They're Dunsville. Like they're getting killed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, like Cunningham has said, yeah, there was no morality thing about it. It was just what kids do, and then they get picked off one by one. Like that was the whole point of the movie. So, there's that. The only other thing behind the scenes wise that I'm curious about, and I've seen this in a couple of spots, so I assume it's true, but I don't know for certain. The snake was a real snake that they killed.
Looked like it.
It did, but I also wonder because while there might not have been like a PETA involved necessarily, there would have been a lot more backlash, because this would have been right around the same time as there was an Italian movie called Cannibal Holocaust that also had the on-screen killing of a turtle, and they legitimately did that. And that movie, along with the fact that it was incredibly brutal and people thought that it was a snuff film,
based on the title, I can't imagine why.
Well, yeah. I mean, that was one where the director was actually brought up on charges. They were going to charge him with murdering the cast, and the cast had to be like, no, we're alive. Like no one died. It was a movie, type of thing. But I did read a few different things saying that like the snake was real. Even one that said that the snake was a trained snake, and that the person that brought it to set didn't know it was going to get killed. I don't know. Because I've seen it in multiple places, maybe believe it, but it's also kind of hard to believe that they would do that, like, and not it just be a snake that they found, but who knows? But apparently it was a real snake, and obviously not something you would do today.
No,
So
that was very. It was also very Three Stooges.
it was a little bit like that. Was I think my note at
Five or
that point
six
was
Stooges. Yeah.
these are the most ineffectual camp counselors ever because they can't do anything right.
And then asking, "Is it dead?" Well, literally cut it into like five pieces. Like,
Right.
what do you mean?
It's
Is
in-
it dead?
It's in parts. So yeah. Also, the music in this is really good, but I always forget how much it reminds me of Psycho. Like the music was done by Harry Manfredini, and you know he was inspired by Bernard Miller's Psycho soundtrack because it just gives me very similar vibes in a lot of parts. The iconic opening music though, that was Harry Manfredini doing that stuff. And that all came about because Mrs. Voorhees starts to lose it, right? And she's doing the voice of kill her, mommy. And so he took the first part of kill and mommy and made that into like it's her hearing that in her head. And that's
Oh,
where
okay.
that came from. And then
Yeah.
he just recorded himself, put the echo on it, and an iconic piece of audio was born.
That to me, it sounded like it was saying "kill her." Like it was hard to tell what that second word was,
Mm-hmm.
which was very interesting because it was like the first part, the kill is like that's very once you
Yeah.
hear it a second time, you're like, okay, I know what that word is. But the second one was very open to,
Yeah.
I think, interpretation. Well, for my ears anyway.
Sure. I mean, speaking of her doing that voice, I did capture some audio, and one of them is Mrs. Voorhees. So this is Betsy Palmer doing a little kid voice, and I love that.
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her.
Old Mrs. Voorhees, the cheese has slipped off her cracker, and oh boy. And she's chasing them around, and I mean, it's brutal. Like, she took out a whole bunch of kids, and effectively, too. I also liked when she's telling the story of Jason, and for whatever reason,
He wasn't a very good swimmer.
wasn't a very good swimmer, and that's all we know.
Should have stayed out of the water, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Crazy Ralph. Fantastic character. He's become a trope. Is that type of character, the crazy old guy, old woman, old person who like warns the kids of what's going to happen. And I love him in this because he's on a bicycle at one point and he rides away. Like there's just everything about Crazy Ralph is great. And when you first meet him, it's just on the street. It's Annie coming out of the diner and he just stops her to say like, you're going up to whatever. And he says,
"You're going to Camp Blood, ain't you?"
Going to Camp Blood. He was great. Played by Walt Gorney, and as Crazy Ralph, and he was fantastic. Like I said, one of my favorite characters in this movie. My two favorite characters. One of them was Crazy Ralph. I did get a couple other ones of him that I want to play because he just kept saying,
"It's got a death curse."
Which that's just a great line out of context, even. Also,
"You'll never come back again."
His delivery is spot on, crazy person. Like it is.
Oh.
He's almost happy
Wow.
to be saying that. Like,
well, and he runs into Annie in the town, and then later on, he just pops out of the pantry.
oh, that was glorious. Yes, that was awesome.
He's just like there, and he pops out of the pantry to warn him again. And he does have this really long exchange with him that I loved, which is,
"God sent me.
Get out of here, man.
I got to warn you. You're doomed to stay. Go. Go."
go. But the
Gets
one
on his bike and pedals out of town.
Yep.
Pedals out of camp.
The one to get though is one last time Annie or Alice goes outside and sees him as he's at his bike, and he just says to her,
You're all doomed.
"You're all doomed." And then he gets on his bike and pedals away. It's brilliant.
And it's a long shot of him pedaling too. It's not just him going. It's like it follows him for like a solid 10 seconds going down the path and out of town. Like,
oh yeah. No, we got to pad that runtime. Got to watch him ride all the way. My other favorite character is Deputy Dorf. Officer Dorf is his name, the cop that just shows up on his motorcycle. And one of the things, from a narrative standpoint, he doesn't need to be there, because the idea is that this camp is very isolated. And so they wanted to have it feel like these kids are isolated. They're so far away that there's nobody to come help them. But then in the middle of the movie, you just got a cop shows up for no reason to warn him for something. But while he has no purpose to be there, I loved it because he was hilarious. Because as he rides up, you get Ned being just a complete idiot with the headdress on and like doing.
he wrapped his shirt. Didn't he wrap
Yeah.
his shirt around his underwear as like looked like a giant diaper?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wrapped his it's like a football jersey he had wrapped around his waist like a diaper, and he's going around. But the cop cracked me up because when Ned sees him and stops, and then he goes over and he tells the cop, and I just love this exchange.
Yeah, right. I'm just fooling
Can it,
around.
Coachies?
Can it, Coachies? Which is one of my favorite like dismissive terms for somebody, just calling them Coachies. It's terrible, but it cracks me up. I laugh every single time. And then Kevin Bacon's character, Jack, comes over and is like, "Hey, nice bike." And cop can tell he's high as a kite. And one of my other favorite things are police officers rattling off street names for things. And when he asks Kevin Bacon if he's smoking, and he says no,
Causes cancer. You know what I mean? Would you just get off a spaceship or something? Colombian gold, man. Grass, hash, the weed. Dig it?
you dig it? He's trying to be cool and hip with the kids. Oh,
It's like he just
Officer
came
Dorf.
straight out of the 60s.
Yep. And then finally, one more thing to Ned.
I told you to sit on it, Tonto.
It's so wrong.
It's so wrong. It's so
So
terrible.
wrong.
Oh, but it made me laugh. It made me laugh way too much. I mean, this is your prototypical slasher movie. So it's not the first one. Obviously, Halloween was before it. And before that, you had Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And this was the type of thing where, we were just iterating on it. This was the early stages of this type of horror. And you're building on that. And there's a film critic that I found a great quote from. Is Devin Faraci or Faraci? I don't know how to pronounce that, so I'm just going to do both and we'll go with it. But he is one that defends Friday the 13th as the best franchise in horror history. Because of the consistency of the movies. Not that what he said was, if you took an individual Friday the 13th movie and put it up against Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween or any of those other movies, doesn't stand a chance. But consistently throughout the movies, they're all the same level, which makes for a great series. And I honestly agree with that, because for me, my favorite slasher movie is Halloween. John Carpenter's Halloween, 1978. Brilliant. Love it. The series as a whole is okay. And there's some pretty bad ones. But consistently, the Friday the 13th movies give you the same level. They're not spectacular, but they're all pretty good in their own kind of campy way. But his line that I loved, the quote was, "If we were to put individual films against each other, no Friday the 13th movie would stand a chance. How could they when they're comparing them to films like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween or A Nightmare on Elm Street? But the greatness of these foundational films is also the weakness of their series. When a series begins on such a high note, it's all but impossible to match that. How can you recapture the specific genius of Halloween? The answer is you can't, which is why John Carpenter tried to change the direction of the series with Halloween 3. He saw the high water mark was set, and he knew he couldn't do that again with The Shape. But the producers didn't recognize that. And so they just kept churning out a bunch of terrible sequels. But the first Friday the 13th isn't a work of genius. It doesn't have the revolutionary grunginess of Toby Hooper brought to Leatherface and Family. The original Friday the 13th is a very solid movie, a very good entry in the burgeoning slasher genre, and a sort of American take on the Giallo concept. Unlike the other classic slasher series, the first Friday doesn't even set up the iconography of the series. While the other series came out of the gate in a blaze of brilliance, Friday ambled into the track like Jason Voorhees, moving at a reasonable pace and happy to let other runners exhaust themselves. And I like that because it's a really good point. This movie doesn't have any of the icons that became staples of the franchise moving forward. There is no Jason is mentioned, but he's not a character in it. He was conceived as just a plot device. And he wasn't even going to be in the movie, and they kind of added him later on. And Sean Cunningham didn't even like the idea of focusing on Jason as the killer in sequels. So he sort of distanced himself from that. And he's said since then, like, clearly I was wrong. But you don't have Jason. And Jason doesn't even get his iconic hockey mask until the third movie in the series. Yet, this movie works really well because it knew what it wanted to be, which is a small kind of whodunit, more mystery with brutal gore. And it wanted to, basically, they wanted to rip off Halloween but add blood, because that was the one thing Halloween didn't have, was really any on-screen blood. And so they just wanted to add that aspect to it and kind of rip off that formula, which, hey, it worked for Halloween and it worked for this movie. Because I think they made this for, same thing, like $500,000, and it made $50 million, something like that. Mm-hmm. So it's huge.
Still raking in the dough.
Yeah. And spawned a dozen sequels. But its strength is the fact that the characters are, all in all, with the exception of Ned, likable. So you actually care that they're getting killed off. But they're also not perfect. Like, they're likable, but they're not overly good either. They're just normal kids.
Yeah, they're regular people. They're not complete asshats. They're not saints. They're people. They're kids.
Now, I mentioned earlier that the ending for this, the twist, shouldn't work. Like, on paper, if I was to tell you, hey, I got this horror movie, right? Kids are dying and they're at a camp. And then in the last 20 minutes, we're going to reveal that the killer is somebody we haven't talked about at all for the first hour and 10 minutes of the movie. And they're going to show up and reveal themselves as the killer the whole time. That shouldn't work. That just shouldn't. But it does here. It's weird that they were able to earn that in this movie, in my opinion. And I think it's on the strength of Betsy Palmer and her performance.
Yeah, and I would pair that along with all of the first person shots, because you never know who it is. And as people are dying, it counts them out as the killer, of course.
Yeah.
And there's never any one person who is, like, typically, like, the Scream franchise, it's, they always make you think it's one of three people. Halloween, it's Mike Myers, they talk about that. And in this one, they don't actually give you a plausible killer. It is literally a ghost until she comes out. Like, obviously there's a hand there, but everything is first person.
Yeah.
It's very androgynous. It's very, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's very, you just don't
ambiguous.
know.
Yeah.
Ambiguous.
Yep. And it's one of those things where when you learn that, like, oh, we didn't really have much of a script and we were kind of making it up as we went, it makes sense that they wouldn't really have that all fleshed out. And I think that if you were to do it in a vacuum and kind of do it again, you would do more of what Scream did. Like, the first Scream does kind of have you like, oh, maybe it's this person, maybe it's that person. But it's like they do all sorts of stuff. Like, at one point, Scream will make you try to think, maybe it could be the sheriff, right? Because he's got the right boots, or maybe it could be your dad, or maybe it could be Randy, maybe it could, and it's like that was the kind of stuff that was born out of this movie, right? This movie laid some groundwork so that you could iterate off of that and take that and go in a new direction with it. And again, like I said, it's building off of the horror movies that had come before it and things like Agatha Christie, whodunits, and all of that. But I think it was smart to have your main characters all be regular people and not like, oh, this is the one good person in a bunch of dumbasses. And they're all making horrible decisions. They don't get a chance to make those bad, tropey horror movie choices because they don't know anyone else is getting killed. None of them know that. The only one that ever ends up knowing it is Alice. And by that point, she doesn't really make any of those classic horror movie blunders. Like, yeah, she has a freak out moment when Brenda gets thrown through the window. But to this point, she hasn't known any of her friends have died. Any of these people have died. And now all of a sudden a body gets thrown through a window at her. I'm going to freak out and scream too. Right. And not know what to do for a second. Like, shock is going to hit you. But she handles herself well after that. So that's the other thing that I liked for the most part. I mean,
and it's interesting because they played upon the insanity of being so scared that shit doesn't make sense. She pulled open the door, walked into the cabin, and then proceeded to start barricading the door.
Yeah.
And when you are that scared, you don't understand that that's not going to work because the door is opening out. Like, and then she finally realized and pulled the rope and tied it. But, I think it did a good job of just not, like, there's a lot of subtlety in this movie that I think really helped it to be visceral, more scary, more enjoyable, to be honest.
Yeah, I enjoy this quite a bit. The sequels build on the formula and kind of distill it down, and they add different elements to it as they go. And some of them work better than others, which is going to happen anytime you have multiple entries. But they do move away from the sort of whodunit type of story because now we know that it's Jason kind of going forward, but they play around with that a little bit. Now that you've seen this movie, do you have any desire to watch the sequels in it? Is it something that you would check out more of?
Yeah. I will definitely watch them at some point. We kind of discussed making this a yearly thing. Every year we just watch a new one.
Yeah.
I'm down for that if you want to do that. Otherwise, that'll be next Halloween or maybe, when I have time. That's definitely a series I think I'll enjoy, probably up to the absurdity of Jason X and Jason versus Freddy or Freddy versus Jason or whatever that stuff is. I mean, that looks like it could be schlocky fun, but it looks like I just don't know how that works.
It's Jason X, I think, has fun with its premise. And
that's in space,
in
right?
the future. Yeah, that's in space.
Yeah, okay.
In the future and all of that. So it goes places. It's curious. It's interesting because I know from the aspect of fans of the series which sequels they like and don't like. And you being somebody that's coming to it new, I'll be very curious as you get through more of the sequels to hear which ones worked better for you and which ones didn't. Because it's sort of the Halloween thing of like Halloween 3 didn't work for a lot of people because they wanted more Michael Myers. And then when we got more Michael Myers, it turned out to not be that great. So, you can kind of go that way whereas Nightmare on Elm Street does need Freddy. And I think you have to kind of continue to use Freddy. These movies evolved and created Jason, and it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to talk about all that, but I'm really glad that you enjoyed this.
I did. This will probably be a yearly if not randomly in the middle of March, but probably a yearly Halloween, along with my staples, Scream and The Exorcist and Halloween. This will probably be a yearly tradition. I liked it. I really did enjoy it.
Well, and I'm glad that you finally got to see it, because it is one of those that I feel like, as somebody who likes horror movies, it's just, you've got to watch Friday the 13th. You've got to watch some of these at some point. And it's nice to see where horror came from and sort of what was considered to be too much in 1980. We look at now as, well, I know people that would see this for the first time and be like, well, this was slow, it was boring, and it wasn't that gory. But for the time, it was very much so. And so it's cool to see what brought about and what was built on. So I do like that. Now you have some projects that you work on and some shows that you do. Why don't you tell people about those? Where can they find you?
Oh yeah, I'm all over the place, man. So I do a podcast called Two Nerds One Quest. It is a live play D&D stream that we do Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. Eastern Time over on twitch.tv/Tom M Norm, TOMMNORM. Or you can also join us on YouTube. I do that restream thing, so it shows up on YouTube as well. You can go bit.ly/nerdtube
Nice.
to get to the YouTube. We have all of our archives there as well. Cooch, who is a part of the show, has actually been here with us today. Crazy Cooch in your chat right now is one of our dudes.
Excellent.
Who's on the show with us, and yeah, we have a lot of fun. It's about 2 hours real play, and we've changed it up a bit here and there, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. And I play games there every once in a while as well.
Cool. Two Nerds, One Quest. Check it out. bit.ly/nerdtube.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. I record this show every week, Sunday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I record it live at twitch.tv/tvstravis, youtube.com/@tvstravis. You can find it there. Or go to tvstravis.com. It's got links to all the live stuff there. It's got links to all my social media stuff there. Patreon is on there as well. So if you want to become a patron of this show and help me to continue to make it and to do things like my live episodes that I do a couple times a year, you can do that there. That's patreon.com/WYHS. There's some new content coming. I know I've been saying it for a couple of weeks, but I've almost got it finished and ready to go. And I'm starting it with my watch of The Fall of the House of Usher. Some mini episodes of my reactions to that series will be patron only. So you have to be a patron to find those. But come check that out. And definitely, spread the word on this show. Get your friends to listen to it if you listen and enjoy it. tvstravis.com to find that. I appreciate everybody that listens. I do this because it's a lot of fun. And yeah, now next week, I have Tim of the Horse Girls podcast is going to come on. And we're going to talk about, he's never seen Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So I can't wait to show him that. Because I'm really curious what he's going to think about it. I adore that movie so much, and there's so like it goes places. So I'm really curious to see what he thinks of that. So that's going to be next week, and I got some more fun stuff coming up with some good movies in the next month or so as we get closer and closer to my 300th episode of this show, which is insane to think about. I don't know what I'm doing special for that yet, but I'll do something. So yeah, that is this week's episode. Thank you so much, Norm, for being here. This was a ton of fun. It's great to have you on. We'll do it again. We'll figure out when to do Friday the 13th part 2.
Yeah, that sounds great, man. I appreciate it. I appreciate you letting me come on here and muddy up your stream with my random weird takes.
Oh no, I loved it. I love that you noticed things like the rifle butt to the crotch and the frying pan and all that. Like I love it. But no, this was great. Anytime. We'll do it. We won't wait a year to do Friday the 13th part 2. Let's put it that way. We'll do it sooner than that.
Good.
So until then, and next week with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Remember to enjoy your movies and be excellent to each other. There's been Wait You Haven't Seen.
Oh, shit.
Terrible. Absolutely terrible.
That's so wrong.